Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
On the Salience Podcast this week, we explore the relationships between culture and change and the importance of curiosity. Today, Ian and I are going to team up to interview our good friend, Nina Bressler, Global Head of Societal Learning at Novartis. Hi, Ian and Nina.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Wonderful. So we've been collaborating with Nina for a couple of years now, having really fun and inspiring chats with her and her team. Nina leads an aspirational program to help Novartis achieve their vision of reimagining medicine. Nina's focus is to deliver sustainable learning outside the company by supporting key partners and networks to build skills that strengthen the healthcare system and improve health outcomes. At the heart of her work is a purpose to help people thrive. She believes that curiosity unleashes people, teams, organizations, and their potential. She has honed her ability to navigate complexity through leading transformation. She evolved her focus from processes to people, from systems to culture, and from solving for the complicated through controls to being comfortable with the ambiguity of complexity, and even thriving in emergent and transformative environments that challenge her creativity and call upon her to bring her most innovative self to the solution. Welcome, Nina, to the Salience Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really great to be here. And I have loved collaborating with both of you the past few years. It's also been really inspirational for me.
Really nice. So glad to have you here. We're going to go right into it. And I have to admit, I have just read the book chapter you contributed to that anthology, Do What Makes You Feel Alive. Yes, such a great story. And I thought it'd be great to share that with everyone. So could you share a little bit about your early life, what some of your early experiences or tipping points that influence who you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. My family is Russian Jewish, and both of my parents were born before World War II in Leningrad. So my mom was 4 when the war started, and my dad was 6. And for my mother, her father was quite high up in the army, and my grandmother actually sustained a shrapnel injury pretty early in the blockade of Leningrad. The Nazis had it fully surrounded, and so my grandfather got my mother and grandmother out on some of the first transports that could go across the frozen Lake Ladoga in the winter. That was the first opportunity that the people of Leningrad had to escape the blockade. And so one of my mother's early memories is that her transport and another transport were going across the lake. The transports were bombed, and the other transport actually went through the ice. So that was quite an early trauma. And for my father, he spent actually the first winter in Leningrad, and there was a lot of starvation and all the really, ugly things that come with war, with starvation, especially in a blockade. And then his family was also able to escape the blockade. Many others weren't lucky in that way. When my family came back to Leningrad, they had to register for new passports, and there wasn't really that much anti-Semitism yet in the 40s in the Soviet Union. And so they registered as Russian Jews from the lens of ethnicity. Later, a lot of anti-Semitism kind of built up in the Soviet Union. And then in the 70s, Teddy Kennedy actually negotiated a deal with the Soviets that Russian Jews could immigrate to Israel. And what it meant for my family was that they could now try to leave the Soviet Union. So my father wasn't able to leave at the time because he had been an engineer on some Navy vessels. He helped design several more modern ships and things like that. So he wasn't able to go. So my mother said, listen, I really want to get our son out of here. So she left with my brother, with my grandmother. And at the time, they traveled through Vienna. And that's where the refugee agencies kind of helped these Russian Jews then either continue to Israel or go to other countries, typically in the West. Interestingly enough, for my family, actually, my grandmother had been baptized Lutheran. So we ended up being helped by Catholic charities instead of the Jewish Refugee Agency, which meant we got to stay in Vienna. So also a very lucky moment for us to be able to leave the Soviet Union. Many others weren't lucky. And also lucky that we got to stay in Vienna. And my mother started to feel sick. She was in her early 40s. She went to the hospital and they said, oh, well, actually, ma'am, you are pregnant. So I was born, she decided to have me. She was immigrating to a new country. She didn't speak good English. She was planning to continue to America, where they had some friends who had immigrated in a slightly earlier wave. And the refugee agency said, you really need to stay in Vienna to have the baby, and then you can continue on. So I was born in Vienna. And then we came to the United States when I was 4 months old, and I grew up in Boston, and my life was so different from my mother's. So coming up, as your child grows, you often reflect on what was your life experience at that same age. So she shared a lot of stories with me as I was coming up, and, I went to amazing schools. I had great teachers. I had a lot of security that she just didn't have. So this kind of feeling of being lucky and also needing to live my life to the fullest played out in me. So it was both a feeling of gratitude and I would say also a pressure in some ways. I think a lot of immigrants experience that you're trying to live opportunities that weren't always there for your parents. And so that, let's say, polarity played out in me for years, and it led me to really be curious about the world and try out many things. And I had many different roles coming up and played around in many different subcultures, everything from kind of punk rock to horse sports to, also like my Russian communities. So I never felt like a citizen, let's say, of one country. I felt like a citizen of the world and all these different places where communities were built. And I think that really has come through to my work.
Now, that is an amazing sort of background. You had gone through so much when you were in utero. And, even more sort of when you started your life. And you've brought out this really interesting polarity that you mentioned, this gratitude for what you were given, the opportunities that you had, and then also the pressures to sort of live up to certain things. I mean, it's such an interesting one because I think that Singapore is also a migrant nation. So a lot of those polarities, I think, play out. And it's an interesting one. I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into that, if you don't mind.
Sure. I don't mind at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, could you share a little bit maybe the kind of pressures and how they played out in real experiences in your life, some examples?
I think that around me, there was a lot of pressure on kind of academic success or cultural success. So maybe one example is my mother always had aspirations to be a musician, but she didn't live those aspirations. She ended up kind of getting sidelined into more of a technical career. She was an engineer, and I don't think she really got to live her full creativity. So she wanted me to play violin. And it was right at this kind of time in my life when I was developing from a place where I really wanted to please my parent to where I started to kind of develop my own identity and think about what was important for me individually and what I liked. And so for the first 2 years of violin, I was quite diligent about practicing and I followed my mother's wishes. And then a time came when I just didn't want to play anymore because it wasn't an intrinsic desire in me to do so. And I wanted to ride horses. And so we had some big fights and arguments about it. And I finally gave up on the violin and I went all in on horses. I spent every weekend at the horse stable all summer. Again, we were immigrants, so it wasn't that we could afford to have a horse or anything like this or even pay for lessons. So I had to exchange work in exchange to ride. And I really worked so hard for it. So it was also that mentality of nothing is I'm not entitled to this. And so I have to work hard for it, but I chose to work for my dream rather than that of, my mom's pretty early on. Sorry, Mom. Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, so that's an interesting segue because you and your team work on such an interesting topic, which is that of inspiring curiosity. And I wanted to sort of link some of these early experiences that you've just talked about into your career. What happened that nudged you further along into this school of applied curiosity?
I think several things. I'd like to say that part of it is really, the bigger part of it is this intrinsic passion to do what I love, because that's what really makes me feel good and brings my best self into any situation. So I think already from that violin versus horses experience, I saw that one thing energized me. It made me feel alive. It made me actually commit myself far beyond what a normal 10-year-old or 11-year-old does. The amount of, let's say, even just manual labor that we did was really huge. And so I was able to see that somebody's passion can really drive them to do incredible things once they're committed. It wasn't a conscious commitment. I think now I think that being conscious about those commitments is actually much, much more powerful. And so I try to bring that out in people, but also let them find that intrinsic passion and joy for doing certain pieces of work. And sometimes that's not really evident for people. They can't, I don't know. One example might be I also worked in the restaurant industry, and I really love learning about people. So there's many parts of working as a waitress that aren't elegant or nice, but it brought me a lot of energy in that time when I worked there to talk to my customers. They were coming from all over the world, and to really get to know them. So I think part of that work around curiosity is helping everyone see what is the part of their work and of their lived experience that does bring them energy and helps them connect back to their inner purpose and their passion.
Mm. I'd like to pick up on that. And I like this idea that people have an experience around working in restaurants. I think that would be a perfect form of national service. I think everybody at some point in their early lives should have to work in restaurants to learn humility, hard work, customer relations, how to relate with people, how to actually, deal with some really, really challenging jobs. I think it's a perfect training ground, perhaps more useful than university in many ways. So, but I also want to draw that link, build on this idea of that, what we learn from our early lives and how they can be applied, restaurants, the hard work to support your passion for horses. And I want to apply that, some of these patterns, some of these attributes that you've talked about, the lucky, seizing opportunities, and it could have gone either way. You could have, your parents could have been in the truck that got bombed or the one that didn't. There's some serendipity there, and then you capitalize on that, and you move countries, you work hard, you get educated, all of those things, and you have gratitude. And I look at so many organizations at the moment. So many organizations are going through transformations, and people seem lost. They seem caught up in the small stuff. They don't want to let go of the things that they're doing right now. It's some of the observations. And what I want to do is I want you to think about some of those attributes: serendipity, gratitude, hard work, connecting to passion. What does that tell us about successful transformation and some of the things that you've been doing in that space?
I mean, I think we know from kind of the history of even spiritual traditions that is kind of the path to well-being, right? And is spending more time consciously in a state of being where those are attributes that you feel, and that you can cultivate those through various practices, whether it's meditation or exercise or connection to nature. All those energies that you just described are ones that can be cultivated. And we know that when individuals cultivate those, that they bring that into the communities that they work with, whether it's a team, a family, a work environment, and that everyone benefits. So I think the lesson really is that even when you're in a state of transformation, you have whether it's positive or negative, you really have the opportunity to influence the energy that emerges by doing your own inner work. So for me, I think the most important lesson is that of accountability and responsibility of the individual to show up in a way that leads to, let's say, what I like to think of as generative rather than degenerative energy in the environment that they're in. And so that's how I try to live. I think that probably if I take a trauma-informed lens on it, having this kind of Soviet history behind my family, war, and then even now, some of the fear-based culture that is existent in Russia, and having that kind of in my cultural influence or being aware of it, I also realize how easy it is to cultivate less generative energies, right? So to come from a place of fear in your decision making, and how that leads to to decisions that just aren't compassionate to individuals, to life, to humans, or to the systems that they exist in.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that personal responsibility, and things can either be generative or degenerative depending upon your state of being.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could reflect on some of the change processes that you've been involved in these very large companies. Novartis has got more than 100,000 associates. It's an enormous company, and change is incredibly complex. And I'm interested in this well-being emphasis that you talk about, and how much is organic within the business, and how much was really around design. Well-being design. And I know one of your colleagues is focused on that at the moment, and Rika. And I'm really interested in that distinction between, can we design for well-being, and have you seen that support change in big organizations like yours?
Yeah, so our CEO, he really believed that in order for us to deliver on our purpose of reimagining medicine, we needed to be, first of all, inclusive of as many perspectives on how to solve for the complex challenges that stand in the way of that as possible, and for people to be able to sustain their thought leadership and their energy and their ability to innovate in that complexity, that the kind of focus on individual energy and well-being and capacity really was critical. And so that's a conversation that, of course, was role modeled at the top. But then with the work of these communities and these employee resource groups, an initiative called Energized for Life, you really saw that kind of penetrate throughout the whole organization. And I really appreciated, and still do appreciate, that conversation isn't about just resilience to stress, but it's also about how you can be generative in your work. So holding that, let's say, the idea that for us to perform as individuals in a compassionate way, then to ourselves and to the work that we do, that we need to be also accountable for our well-being.
I think you just gave some great examples of how to lead change with a focus on people first. It's about well-being, it's about role modeling, and it's initiatives at different levels within the business. And I like this mention of influencers, informal leadership with a focus on well-being. Just flipping that for a moment, and thinking perhaps about other organizations or other experiences that you've either had directly or seen. If we wanted to ensure that change and transformation failed, what would be your top 3 things that you'd recommend? If you wanted to guarantee failure, what would you do? Top 3 things.
So I think that assuming that change can be cascaded from executive decisions down to people is probably number one. Change is not a cascade. So I think focusing solely on performance and not the purpose of change is probably number 2. And number 3 is leveraging fear as a driver. Sometimes that can come through in this focus on performance solely, but it can also come through. I see it come through a lot because I'm in the learning industry around skills and the need to build skills so that we're not impacted by innovation or the emerging future. And I think that is not a generative state of mind to do meaningful work. So yeah, top-down leadership, disconnection from purpose, and fear-based messaging, I would say, are for me the top 3.
Bingo. I would agree with those. Isn't that just spot on? And in my domain, I'm called in as a consultant and as a change agent to deliver training programs. And these are pretty well the top 3 things that I encounter when I'm brought in. Because people, if things are going well, they don't usually pick up the phone. When things are going really badly, then they pick up the phone. And these are the patterns that I see. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If they're calling you in, they're already in a place where they're not able to hold capacity for the various challenges that are coming up in their environment. So they're reaching out for help, and those behaviors come out of becoming your capacity being reduced for whatever reason and being in more distress as a leader. So.
Yep.
That's really interesting spin on capacity building and learning. I want to shift a little bit now to talk about your current focus area, which is really interesting because it's really very progressive, forward-looking, and you're looking in the space of societal learning. How would you describe this aspiration and where you're hoping to create some impact?
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of looking at 3 to 5 year horizons, or a 1 year horizon, a 3 to 5 year horizon, and then kind of a 20 to 40 year horizon. If I work my way back, the 20 to 40 year horizon is really about equity in health systems and equity in access to medicine. I wouldn't say that I'm creating that. I'm one little part of a much larger system. But I do hope that I can influence that conversation. I really believe that equitable access to education and healthcare is the foundation of any society that we wish to then progress into kind of more generative or thriving ways of living. If I go back to kind of the 3 to 10 year horizon, it's the initial programs that we're standing up really focus on specific issues. And then I have I'll describe them in a second. And then I have a third program, which really is meant to align to some of these beliefs that I shared about capacity building in leaders. So the program that is most furthest along in its development is one that is looking at challenges in diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical research and development. So Novartis signed a pledge called the Beacon of Hope Pledge with 29 historically Black colleges and universities in the United States, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and then also several other pharma companies and also Coursera. So in that pledge, we committed to driving diverse talents into clinical research and development so that actually the diversity of how medicine or medical devices are researched increases, and that all societal, let's say, perspectives and needs from a physiological perspective are actually researched in the development process. You know, during the pandemic, it came out in the press and that oximeters, so the devices that measure your oxygen, that they did not measure accurately on darker skin. So a lot of people in the US, let's take as an example, that are from Black or Hispanic communities, they actually already tend to have access to hospitals that maybe aren't as well equipped as those in primarily white communities. And now you had a situation where people were coming in, there was a need to triage whether or not they could stay in the hospital, and the oximeters were measuring their oxygen higher than it really was. So in the interest of triaging them, they were sent home, sometimes for delayed treatment, sometimes for more catastrophic ends where the person died. And that's just an example where, because oximeters were never tested on sufficiently on Black and brown skin, that this progressed through to a really systemic issue. So we want to solve for this at the root cause, which is bring that diversity into the people designing the trials, looking at the data, doing the investigations. The second course in my portfolio is called Value Chain Academy, and it looks at challenges in in solving for falsified medicines, for wastage in the supply chain, and for quality issues in the supply chain in low and middle income countries. We know that about 1 million people die a year globally from falsified medicines, and there's also huge wastage where medicines leave the manufacturing facilities of pharmaceutical companies, but never make it to patients. So it's, you know, challenges around building trust in the system around medicines, and also getting medicines to the patients that need them. And then the program that is most nascent that I've been talking actually to you guys about, that you've been contributing to the conversation so beautifully, is about capacity building in the hearts and minds of people who actually lead these systems and who play a role in them, either as doctors, as medical students, as frontline workers, nurses, etc., so that they can hold the complexity in the system, so that they can be better leaders and create environments where people are more resilient to the challenges in what is a very emotional, complex, and high-pressure environment.
That is an amazingly broad portfolio. Thank you for describing that. I mean, we're super excited to be a part of it. And some of these initiatives sound so useful and sorely needed in the system. So it's really nice to be a part of that. I wanted to understand, like, because you work in the space and your current remit sort of forces you to sit and chase the paradigm to see what's most exciting and what you can learn. What are some of the most exciting emergent patterns or trends that make you sit up and go, wow, I really want to be a part of that?
So I think what's most exciting for me is probably this opportunity to be really inclusive. So as somebody who really believes in, or lives, I think, with curiosity, I hope, I also am really curious about people's perspectives and the inclusion of as many voices as possible in anything that, in any work or thought leadership that needs to be generated. So even just doing this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical research and development, I think my curiosity work at Novartis led me to talk to so many just brilliant people that work in this space. But oftentimes I see that individuals' expertise sometimes silos their thinking, and it's just not their natural response to try and include as many voices as possible. That's just not the perspective that they take on the world. So seeing this need for inclusion of diverse perspectives, whether it's in the people included in trials, so from the lens of ethnicity, to even just the way what I talked about in the Leaders in Healthcare vision, so including diverse perspectives into solving for complex problems, that idea of inclusion that I really intrinsically believe is the way that we can live the most fullest lives, have well-being, and solve for really complex issues. That's what really excites me and motivates me. And to be able to create a platform where people can live that too. So.
Yeah, the importance of inclusion and recognizing diversity. You really brought that home in stark contrast there with those pulse oximeters and how they're just not calibrated for black and brown skin. I mean, the obvious things like that really hit you quite hard, I think, when you think that's just one small example amongst a big system of those sorts of biases and disadvantages. And you really brought home for me the importance of some of the things that we've been talking about around customizing and localizing our programs and the way that we might approach things. So making things culturally specific, thinking about some of the cultural norms, thinking about some of the distinctions and bringing those to light, perhaps east-west, perhaps north-south in a global sense. I think there's some quite exciting conversations there. And at this point in the podcast, I usually try and summarize in 3 dot points or less, really what is, in this case, a very, very broad-ranging tour de force of change and curiosity. And I'm going to go with my top 3, then I'm going to hand to Jen for her top 3. And here's what I took, right? There are so many things, but your early life experiences, I think, was so fundamental to who you are and how you approach these massive change and inspirational, aspirational programs. So recognizing luck and serendipity and really capitalizing that from a position of gratitude and hard work. Not just saying, hey, I was lucky, but actually saying, and I'm going to work really, really hard to follow my purpose and my passion. And then sort of building on some of those foundations into today's work with that focus on well-being and people and diversity and inclusion and role modeling that, whether it's the CEO in the business or whether it's you, whether it's influencers. And then that last piece about where your curiosity is right now, your attention on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think there's something there for us to reflect on as a company as well. So that's what I took. Jen, over to you. What did you take?
I should have gone first. That's what I took from that. But I mean, very similar. But I'm going to sort of put a different spin on some of these. Really loved that we had an opportunity for you to share your early life story, because that was such a powerful one. What I took from that is actually something, Ian, you and I discussed in the very first episode of the season. You asked me what I was sort of really curious about, where my attention goes. And I think that resonated for me because one of the things I pointed out is this importance to create awareness of each person's agency, that things happen, but it's not just happening to you, but that you actually have this accountability and responsibility, right? To actually respond and not surrender your agency to the circumstance. And I really think that curiosity, that school of applied curiosity, provides us with the capabilities to consistently look under the bonnet and not just accept things for how they are. That was the first one for me. A second one I picked up as well, this huge trend of well-being as being really important. And for organizations, as they're going through change, or even if you're not going through change, I think right now we're undergoing so much uncertainty that well-being is a proactive capacity that you should build in people, as opposed to it being reactive, because once it's reactive, it's too late. And the third one, huge sort of thread on inclusivity, which I absolutely love. I live in Singapore, and one of the things that our government had started doing like 50 years ago was investing a lot in medicine that focuses on Asian physiologies, because we recognize that the medicines that come out of the quote unquote West, I don't want to use that term loosely, not necessarily going to be as applicable to an Asian diet, physiology, so on and so forth. So I absolutely love that line as well. So those are the three things for me.
Yeah. Do you have any last words, Nina?
I don't know. I just think that doing this work and learning about ourselves and about the systems around us, I mean, that is living curiously, right? But it's just also fun. It's that journey. And it's really great to be on it with other curious people. I think your vibe attracts your tribe. And your tribe doesn't need to be just within the boundaries of the organization that you sit in. I think working with other organizations, networking, other communities, and really trying to apply thinking across institutions is really important. And like this workshop on compassionate systems leadership that I spoke about, that I joined in Stockholm last week, you had people from every type of institution there. And you know what? In the end, we were all actually solving for the same problems. It's just our contexts were slightly different. And the theories and the models and the work that we did was, could be shared and learned from in all different contexts. So thank you guys for being part of that journey with me too. So thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Nina. And we look forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.